Okay, so welcome everybody. And if you haven't yet, please gather your restorative bits and bobs so that we can get nice and comfortable. And we're just going to start in a nice position to get centered and kind of check in with ourselves. I'm going to stay seated here, but you could do seated too, or you could come right into Shavasana if you want, or whatever shape really feels sort of supportive and comfortable for you to check in with yourself and give yourself a chance to feel and just begin to sort of enter into that sweet restorative state of mind. And if you are seated, just get whatever props you need to be comfortable in your seat. Palms face down is a little bit more grounding, which is nice for the energy today. So feel free to try that, see if it feels right for you. You might also be in a place where you're wanting to have your hands on your body somewhere like your heart or your belly. That can be nice too. And then start to tap into your breath. Notice if it feels good for you right now to close your eyes. Notice what it feels like to deepen your breath. And just begin to really soften into the earth, into yourself, into this moment. Maybe there's some tension that you can notice on the surface of your body that you could allow to just slide off. Taking a moment to feel the earth beneath your body, acknowledging the land that you're on. I'm on Plains Cree and Blackfoot land in Treaty 6 territory right now. And just noticing your relationship with that land. Which includes your relationship with the seasons, the plants and animals that are around at this time, the way the sun feels, or maybe it's clouds and rain today. And of course, the phases of the moon. So right now we are still pretty deep in the new moon cycle. It was just last night, so we're still in it essentially. And the new moon is really the perfect time to draw inward towards ourselves, to slow down and to focus on practices of rest. It's also a moment of pause where we can do some reflection. And it is the transition from one cycle to the next. And some of us might be in a place where we are needing a new cycle. We're wanting the energy to shift and change a little bit. And in order to do that, in order to allow for the new cycle to begin, there's a little bit of grieving, acknowledging, letting go that may need to be done around whatever has been happening in the last cycle. So just take a moment, if you're comfortable with it, to pause and notice where you are, what has been happening for you, and what you're hoping for the future. So you're welcome to stay as you are. We're going to do a little bit of tarot together. So you can open your eyes if you like. If you're laying down, again, you're welcome to stay, or you can just gently kind of bring yourself up so that we can do a little bit of work with our tarot for today. So I'm going to share with you the card that I pulled for the energy of today's new moon. So I would love for you to take a look at the card and just let me know. You can unmute yourself and speak up if you want to. What do you notice about the card? What's interesting about it for you? And sort of how do you feel when you look at it?
I kind of get a sense of like a graceful triumph. Like she's in the front, she's in front of the others, but she's also soft. She's leading, but with some grace and some softness.
Yeah, absolutely. A graceful triumph. I love that.
For me, I'm responding to the female quality of it. They're all female figures. And to pick up on what you said at the beginning around the new moon as a way of letting go and some grief, certainly that came up for me, Julie. And there's something about grief in the background here. And yet there's this transition. I too love that graceful triumph idea. I find it quite an optimistic and hopeful card.
Yeah, you're right. Just the sort of statues or images in the back, you could sort of imagine them in a cemetery, like they sort of have that memorial, or transition, you know, from this life to another life. They sort of have that feeling to them for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I find I really respond to the sort of statuary element of it. And I think for me, the juxtaposition between the flowers and the like sort of frozen in time-ness of it is a reminder of me that all things change and natural things sort of blow through human structures. If that makes sense. I think with the statuary, she has kind of I find her quite stern, and she's holding that sword, and she's, you know, queenly, and she has that authority, but she's still holding these flowers. And it's like almost like the flowers have been put there as things that are changing. Like she's been frozen in time as this sword wielding royal, but still things are shifting and changing around her. And as I see the other sort of statues to me in the background, I feel like they're fading. And it's just a reminder to me how, no matter how fixed I think things are, that they are always in flux and they can always fade and change. And because of the meaning of something might have meant something when it was installed, it does not mean that it means the same thing that it does now. Like even the symbol within it can shift.
Absolutely. I love that reminder of just like how fixed I think myself to be, or how fixed I think things to be, that there's always change, that there's always transition, there's always a shift that's available or happening, you know, whether we're aware of it or not. Yeah, something that strikes me about her is that she's statue-like, but not quite as statue-like as the ones behind her. And so I sort of wonder, like, is she becoming a statue, or is she coming to life from having been a statue, right? Like there's sort of there's something different about her than the other ones, right? So it feels like she's in a transition of some kind as well, maybe.
It's interesting about the colors because she looks like she has this soft pink gown and holding something blue that the flowers are in. And then there's something about looking victorious and celebratory because there's light on her She's front and center. She's holding the sword and it has light shining off of it. So almost as if she's been victorious about something and is now coming out of the darkness behind her and the lack of color and into some light.
Yeah, absolutely. Shifting into some light for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, Elaine, I just got your chat. Are you back in? Can you see everything yet? No? Okay. Do you want to try logging out and logging in and we'll keep going? Okay. Yeah, go ahead. I'll make sure I let you in. Yeah. Yeah, any other sort of initial thoughts before I talk a little bit about the card itself? And of course we can talk more about it as we go. Yeah. So yeah, as usual, I just love what you guys bring, you know, and what you see in the card. There are always things that you are seeing that I'm not seeing right away. And I just love, you know, what the offerings that you've given to the card, even without having spoken about the sort of classical meaning of it. So I'll talk a little bit about that and my interpretation as well. So the queen this is the Queen of Swords, and the queen is someone who's really been through a journey. So some of what you guys are saying about, you know, transition and victory and that graceful triumph, you know, she's been on a journey that's been challenging. And when we're talking about swords is really the most challenging suit of the tarot deck. There's a lot of grief in swords a lot of the time, and swords is really, it's air, it's the intellectual realm. And it's interesting to me because, you know, the intellectual realm isn't inherently like bad or, you know, dangerous or anything like that, but it really is our thoughts that often get us in trouble, right? It's like, it's not necessarily the things that are happening, but our expectations about the things that are happening, or the stories that we tell ourselves about the things that are happening. That's what really hurts us. You know, that's the second arrow that we talk about in Buddhism, where, like, you know, the pain happens, but then we add on the suffering. We put the second arrow in ourselves. When we make it mean something it doesn't necessarily have to mean. You know, I was sort of thinking yesterday about how there have been some pretty, like, objectively horrible things that have happened to me this year, but I'm sort of surprised to find that I also feel a lot of access to joy lately, and gratitude, and like there are a lot of really beautiful things in my life as well. And I'm kind of surprised to find that that, you know, the way I thought I was gonna feel, considering all of these things, there have been some surprising nice things that have kind of come through that. And so when we let go of our expectations, sometimes we can find things that are really beautiful in that way. So again, the queen is someone who has mastered the sword, and the sword in the tarot deck, some of you guys might have been here when we were talking about Sleeping Beauty and the sword of truth, right? The sword of discernment. It's like the sword that has that double-edged quality where it can kind of cut through. The way I've been thinking about it is cut through our own like mental bullshit, like the things that we tell ourselves internally, that can cut through that and see to truth and reality. And that when we're using the sword appropriately, which the Queen of Swords absolutely knows how to do, she's learned how to do that. And like this sort of grief, you know, or whatever it is, the past that you guys have mentioned is behind her. She's been through some things, so she has figured out through trial and error and maybe many failures how to wield that sword in the service of truth and discernment, rather than the, you know, piercing herself with the sword, like hurting herself with the way that she kind of thinks about things. So, you know, she's thoughtful and she's a statue sort of, but I think, as many of you have pointed out, there's also this quality about her that I think of around swords, where when we've mastered our minds, when we've mastered our discernment and our ability to see the truth, one of the things that does for me is it drops me back down into my body, right? It allows me to not necessarily have to live only in the place of my mind, but it allows me to be in the present, in things like, okay, so yes, there is grief from some things that have happened to me this year, and some things are not great, but I can still be present with the experience of like the joy of just getting hugs from my son, or like whatever that moment is, that I can actually really kind of taste the sweetness of the moment that I'm having, that's real. And so I think that's part of the flowers for me, and part of why she looks so much more lifelike than the statues behind her is that, you know, she has access to mind and body. It's like she's able to use that sword to be more whole rather than to be only in this intellectual or academic realm. So that's some of how I feel about it, or some thoughts that come up for me around it. And anything that you guys want to add about that? Is that resonating for you guys? Yeah.
That totally clicked for me when you talked about I don't know the exact words you used, but the sword when it's turned inward, because we have had swords so many times in this group.
We have, yeah.
It's always right on for me. It's like, get out of my head and all these thoughts that are creating. I love that too. I hadn't heard that, the Buddhist idea of the second sword. It's like the thing that happens, you get to choose your response to it. And if your response is turning that sword inward with the negative thoughts, then it just amplifies everything. But hers, it looks like you said, she's like withdrawn it and now she's like pointed it in the other direction. Like, I can use this now outwardly instead of inwardly. Like, that was a big moment. I had to get my
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, when we're looking to tarot, a lot of the time what we're looking for is guidance. And I think that many of us, I get the feeling, I'm not the only one, craving a bit of a transition, craving a bit of a new cycle, you know, some energetic shift. And so I think part of what the Queen of Swords is guiding us towards is to like acknowledge the lessons that we've learned about the world and also about ourselves and our own minds, and specifically with swords, how we talk to ourselves, right? How we treat ourselves, how we judge ourselves when certain things are going on. And to acknowledge the places that we are masters of that, like to allow ourselves to be in that place of knowing what we know at this point in our journey. And of course, no one expects the journey to ever be finished around all of these things. Like, of course, it's an ongoing journey to, you know, learn about ourselves and whatever it is. But, you know, I think the feeling around that is like, as we're entering into this new phase, we want to have this awareness of our swords and how we talk to ourselves and how we are in the intellectual realm, but to actually use that to allow us to be with the flowers, to be with the body, to be with, you know, the heart, to be with the body. And I think for me, I'm thinking of, I think she's transitioning to become more human, less statue. Like, I think that's sort of what the transition is. It's like moving a little bit out of that intellectual place and into a place where there's a lot of movement and light, like Laurel was mentioning, the sort of flowingness of her robe and her ability to sort of move forward. So those are some of the things I'm thinking of, and I feel like some of you might also have some pieces to add around that. So I would love to hear any thoughts that you have too around imagining, like, what if this card is giving me something to think about around beginning this new cycle for myself? What comes up for you?
Well, I have a sense of relief. It gives me, I appreciate the guide of what you've said, and yeah, so I again, I go back to the sense of hope and relief. Yeah, that's what it does for me. So thank you. I like that. I like that feeling.
Yeah, that's a good feeling. That's good to hear. Hope and relief. That's what we all need, right? Yeah, absolutely. What else?
I feel a sort of call to let my guard down a little bit. Like, I'm really responding to that raised sword, and it feels very watchful and like, you know, you've had to have this protective, like you've needed to protect yourself for a long time, but now you can maybe like let it come down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what you just said, Jane, made me think of Varunda, who's the fourth night of the moon goddesses. Some of you might remember her from the moon goddess meditation. So she's a goddess of vulnerability, and her image is that she's nude, which is very unusual among these types of goddesses. They're from the Shakta Tantra tradition. But she has, I think she has 10 arms. I can't remember how many arms she has, but each one has a different weapon in it. Like she's got many, many weapons. And so one of the lessons with her is that when we become really aware of our vulnerable places, we're actually more protected than when we don't really know what our vulnerabilities are. And this is actually a theme that's come up with several of the people I've been working with this week, is when we're trying to figure out trust, vulnerability, and boundaries, there's often this feeling of like, it's either 0% or 100%. And a lot of the time we have to kind of work on this nuance of, I need this much protection, or like, this is where my limit is now. And that limit is going to change a little bit because I have some new information, even though I'm in an old situation or whatever it is. And just kind of working with that nuance of how do I protect myself in a way that allows appropriate vulnerability, appropriate openness and trust when it's been earned, for example, or when I'm getting like a lot of green flags around this being a safe environment. But then when a red flag comes up, I can adjust that and, you know, guard myself a little bit more if I need to, rather than having this feeling of like, I'm 100% closed or 100% open, and neither of those really are working for me, right? And so I like the idea of her, again, it's like the sword isn't going in, it's going out. It's the sort of discernment, it's the sort of truth. And it's kind of using that smart brain that we have to help us to rationally work through, when am I vulnerable? When am I safe? When can I open up? And when do I need to protect myself? Because sometimes we do need to protect ourselves, right? And just being able to really discern when those moments are, so that we can know how to be vulnerable in a way that's actually generative and powerful for us, rather than disempowering, right? Yeah. So I love that idea. Thank you for just bringing that in as well. Yeah. Okay, so we'll continue to just work with this sort of feeling and image as we go into our lovely deep restorative rest. And we can come back and chat more about the card after we do our practice as well. Okay, any burning thoughts before we do that? We're ready to rest? Yes, good, we do. Okay, beautiful. All right. So let's begin our restorative practice. And I'm going to offer that we begin with a heart opening shape, okay? So there are lots of different ways to do this. And a nice simple one is to have a bolster down on a block or two. So you create a little bit of a ramp with it. And if you don't have a bolster, you can use a bed pillow or two bed pillows stacked on top of each other, especially the long ones I find make pretty good bolsters, especially for restorative. If you have more pillows or bolsters, they can go under your knees. Okay, and if you don't have the blocks, you can just lay back on something soft, sort of in between the shoulder blades is where you'd be aiming. Ideally, your neck is supported. And if you are working with some neck or jaw issues, I'm just gonna grab my blanket. You can use a towel or a blanket and just roll it up a little bit underneath your neck. So this blanket is just folded in half. We'll half it again. It's kind of a small blanket. And then I'm just going to roll it up a little bit and then place it, ideally fold side down, but don't worry too much about that, just underneath the neck, so it creates a little support there. And that's just a nice way of helping the neck and the jaw to relax a little bit. That's also really nice if you have a headache. And I like to just kind of snug it up a little bit around my head. A little trick that you can do with the blanket as well is you can take the edges of it and cross. So this is just going to muffle my mic for a second, but you're just going to cross it over one eye and then the other. So it kind of looks like this. And if you have a long enough blanket, the edges will just stay there. If you have something like an eye pillow or a scarf, you can place that over your forehead and just drag it down over your eyes as much as you like. Ideally not a lot of pressure on the actual eyes. It would just be sort of over the eyelids. And then if you have that hot water bottle, bag of rice, sandbag, that could go over the pelvis, the heart, the tops of the thighs, whatever works for you. Palms can be open to the sides. Maybe you want to cover yourself with a blanket as well. And just sinking into the shape. So with our restorative practice, we can fidget, okay, there's time to rest in a pose. And it's nice to kind of add, I had a teacher who used to say, you know, if there's something you can do to be 1% more comfortable, do that. I think the limit to that is sometimes we're uncomfortable because of an internal thing. And we're sort of as comfortable as we can be externally, and then we just need to receive it, right? I'm someone that can sometimes over fidget and over adjust, you know, trying to kind of make it perfect. And sometimes I need to just accept, you know, that I've done the best I can to be comfortable, and then just receive it. Okay, so do the best you can, but then at a certain point, let it go. And if you haven't, you might like to take a deep breath. And just feel your shoulders softening away from each other. Sinking again into the earth beneath you. Receiving this experience of rest. And as we do, ideally in a restorative practice, your mind kind of drifts away. So we don't need to be actively focusing on anything in particular, but it can be really useful to actively focus in order to help ourselves go to that place. So just as we're beginning here to settle in, a place that you could rest your focus until you can sort of drift and relax when and if that happens, is just focusing on your exhale and just allowing each exhale to be an opportunity to soften a little bit more, to let go a little bit more. And just let that be all you're doing. And you might just be observing what your mind is doing. which for me is so much of learning to use the sword of discernment, is just noticing what your thoughts are tending toward. Observing yourself just with compassion, with non-judgment. How do I talk to myself in a moment of rest? Am I allowing myself to rest even in my mind? And take a moment to notice how you're feeling. And keep in mind that you could always stay in a pose longer than I suggest if you're feeling that you need that. It's always also fine to come out early or adjust the pose in some way that works for you if it's no longer working for you. And if you feel ready to move, you can gently remove any heavier props if they're sort of in your way. You might want to take a little bit of an active stretch, reaching the arms up and the legs out long. Then you can bend your knees if they're not already and wash them from side to side like windshield wipers. And we're quite in that new moon phase, as I mentioned. So it's a good time to be really doing quite a pure rest. But if you are noticing that you need a little bit more active movement, you're always welcome to add that, especially between the poses. So I'm just going to talk you right into our next pose, but if you need something in between, feel free to take it. Okay, so I'm just going to roll over to my right side and come up to a seat, and I'm just going to bring my right hip up to my little prop structure here. And I might just leave a lot of this sort of as it is. I can have my knees together with a prop between them, or I can slide my top knee down so I'm in a bit more of a deer position. I'm going to turn towards my props and fold down. So this is a little restorative twist. You might like the feeling of having the blanket under your head there, you might not. Some people really like the little bit of an angle. Some people prefer no blocks and you're just a little more folded down into the pose. You could have your arms in a cactus. I usually like my back arm, that's my right arm, just resting by my hip. Okay, and then a little trick for this one, the eye pillow is usually a little slippery for this kind of shape. So you could take your blanket and just make yourself a little hood to cover your eyes, if you like. Okay. If this twist, so this is an appropriate twist, it's okay for pregnancy as long as it feels good. But if it doesn't and you want to be more laying on your side, you're more than welcome to just move the prop so that it's more like a pillow and come to a nice, comfortable side lying position. Okay. And again, fidgeting is okay. Do whatever you need to do to be 1% more comfortable. And that might be taking your hot water bottle or sandbag. It depends on sort of where it will stay. Sometimes I like the bottom thigh. It's just nice and stable there. You could put it on your hip as well. It's just that little bit of extra weight tends to be kind of comforting. It's not necessarily for any particular, stretch or anything like that. So wherever it's comfortable for you is perfect. And then just taking a deep breath here and softening into it. And I find there's something really nice around the new moon about being really close to the earth, which a restorative practice is in general. But it's also nice to be kind of turning toward the earth. There's almost this feeling of like you can pour your heart out into the earth. Almost this feeling like you could tell the earth whatever you need to. And some of us have been talking about just being in a cycle where there's been some grief or maybe some things to let go around ending this particular cycle and moving into the next one. And so this might be a place where you could imagine your body sort of emptying out some of the things that are ready to be let go. You don't need to think about this cognitively. You don't need to list the things, for example. That gets us into a very head space. So rather, the suggestion here is just to imagine you're kind of pouring it out of your heart without needing to know what it is, and just trust that that process is happening. And then again, when and if that focus has sort of served its purpose, you may allow your mind to wander and your attention to drift. So we've been here for around 5 minutes, and I find for some people that's enough. Others, they like to stay a bit longer. It just kind of depends on your body and how your nervous system is feeling today. So of course, you're welcome to stay longer if you're just not quite ready to move yet. Otherwise, we can gently make our way to the second side. So you can press your hands down into the earth and gently roll up. You can turn away from your props and take a little wash of the knees side to side if you want to. When you're ready, you can turn to the second side. So I've got my left hip now against the bolster and the knees are perpendicular to the bolster. Knees could be together, you could slide that top knee down. So generally we'll try to do the same thing on the second side that we did on the first, but sometimes the two sides are just different. And in restorative yoga, we're not so concerned with symmetry, we're more concerned with comfort. So remember that you can have the blocks underneath your bolster or not. You can have the blanket over your eyes or not. You can have the knees together or not. And if it's just not working for you, you can absolutely lay on your side or in any shape that you know does work for you. And again, excuse me, for me, I usually have the left hand beside my hip. And I should say that goes for when my bolster is all the way down. If I'm working with a bit more elevation, I've got more my elbows on the ground. Okay, so that's just me. Again, just working with your body and what feels right for you. Excuse me. Settling in and continuing to pour your heart out as you need to. So again, we've been here for around 5 minutes. That may or may not feel like enough time for you. So please feel free to stay. If you feel ready to gently make your way out, you can press into your hands and return to a seat. And wash your knees from side to side. And you may also want to extend your legs and give them a little shake. So from here, I'd like for us to come into a Shavasana and be there for a while. So we have some time to really be still in this shape. I'm going to offer something for Shavasana, but I know some of you have a favorite pose where you really do feel most comfortable. So I know for some of you that's massage table. For some of you it's legs up the wall. Okay, so feel free to take your favorite shape. Or you can come with me into a bit of a deluxe Shavasana and see how that feels. And we do have some time. So feel free to come into your favorite pose. And if you're finding you need to adjust it later, you can. We'll have about 10 minutes to rest in this shape. So what I'm going to do for my Shavasana is kind of pile up something underneath my knees. So it depends on what you've got, okay? I have 4 blocks and 2 bolsters, which is an abundance of props. But I'm just going to stack them up. So you could have, if you had just 2 blocks and 1 bolster, you could, just have that. That's great. If you can double it up, and have a bit of a wider one, that's great. You could have a bolster under your knees and like a rolled blanket underneath your ankles. So you're just elevating your legs a little bit is the point. You could also do this by putting your legs over a chair or a couch or a bed or a wall. And then another prop that's a bit lower. So ideally this sort of chip block situation, I'd love for you to try. So I'm just going to come up nice and close. I might need to adjust this. I kind of want the curve of my knees right at the edge of this bolster. That would be ideal. And this is working out quite well for me. I've got the curve of my ankles over the curve of this bolster. I really like it when the props match up perfectly with the curves of my body. That's quite soothing for the nervous system when we do that, okay? So then I'm just gonna tuck this prop underneath my bum so that my hips are a little bit elevated. And some of you may like that, some of you may not. It can be quite soothing for the nervous system, but if it bothers your back, just remove that prop, that's fine, okay? And then I'm gonna take my blanket and I'm gonna do that little neck roll that we talked about. Tuck it up around my head, just giving me that little bit of a softening kind of feeling. I've got my eye pillow and my sandbag, which is going to go over my pelvis. Depending on how high the prop is, you'll see how that feels. I don't want it kind of in my organs. Top of the thighs is really more kind of where it's going to feel good for me, I think. Could be on the chest as well. And then just see where it feels good to have your arms. They could be open to the sides. It could be down at about 45 degrees. They could be resting on your belly or your heart or both. Just kind of see what feels most comfortable for you. And again, think of that 1% more comfortable kind of idea. So give yourself some time to do that. And then once you find a spot that works for you, see if you can kind of commit to it. And again, the idea here is to really be as comfortable as possible. One of the things that I've been working with this week is also around how do I talk to myself about rest? And some of you may know, you may have heard this story. So for me, I've been practicing yoga for a really long time and teaching it for quite a while as well. But I noticed for myself that restorative yoga was quite an advanced practice for me. I actually had one day where I thought I was allergic to it because I got really itchy under the wool blanket, which I don't think I'm actually allergic to, but I just couldn't be still. It was so challenging for me. And it was much easier for me to be in a vinyasa practice where I could really move and flow and there was a lot going on because that was what my mind was like at the time. And it took me a lot of vinyasa yoga to be able to do restorative yoga, to be able to be in shavasana, to be able to actually rest and be still. because there are thoughts. It's again that idea of the swords, these ways that I pierce myself around feeling like it's not okay to rest, feeling like there are other things I should be doing, and so on. And so it's been a practice for me to really allow myself to be in that place of rest and receiving, even knowing everything I know now about the medicine that rest is and how important it is for our physical and mental and spiritual wellness. So, if you have some of those thoughts too, you might notice them coming up. And again, the practice around this kind of metaphor of wielding the sword of discernment is noticing what those thoughts are and not necessarily believing them or acting on them, but just noticing that that's what's happening in your mind. And then letting it go as best as you can, returning to the practice of receiving rest, which might be really simple and easy for you. And it might need a little bit of focus, like focusing on that exhale. And just being in that practice, softening, receiving rest. invite you to take a moment in this place of quiet to listen not to the thoughts, but a little deeper than that, to your heart or your body. And I know some of us are looking for some guidance around shifting into a new cycle. And I invite you to ask your body, to ask a little deeper if there's anything that your body wants to tell you about what you need to know moving through this transition. And that's a question that you could keep open from time to time whenever you find yourself getting a little too much in your head, noticing what it feels like to drop down and listen to your body instead. As always, feel free to stay here. If you're feeling ready to move out of the shape, you can deepen your breath and start to bring some small movements into your fingers and toes. You could take a stretch, reaching your arms up and your legs out long. You can draw your knees in and gently roll over to one side. And of course, if you're coming out of a different kind of shape, just going slowly, going where feels most intuitive to you. We'll meet in a seat. Place your hand somewhere that feels right. It might be at your heart, it might be over top. And then gently bow your mind to your hands, your heart, your body, to your ability to wield the sword of discernment, honoring and acknowledging the long and complex lineage of teachers that is with us in our practice, honoring and acknowledging the sacredness of the land that we practice on. Thank you for sharing that practice with me today.